So after a year fighting with code enforcement, well, maybe even closer to 2 years, I guess he thinks he won. As you know, we run our well off solar panels. What we have here, I'm not going to go through the whole system because I think even 2 days ago I went through this entire system. So if you want to check that video out, at the end of this video there'll be an up next box. You can click it and watch the whole setup. But what I want to talk about is this right here. I actually have 2 of them stacked on top of each other. I'll put it a little closer so you can differentiate between the two. This one is currently on, has a light. This is a 1,000 watt inverter. This bigger one is 2,000 watt inverter. Now you can see here it has a house plug-in. I'm sure you can see that. So what an inverter does is it inverts. It doesn't convert, it inverts. A converter takes AC electricity and changes it to DC, but this changes DC, battery electric, into AC electric, house electric. You can hook these up to your cars. That's what they were originally designed for, but RVs use these and off-grid uses these. Now there's 2 types. You can get a pure sine wave, which is what these are, and they are actual 60 hertz, true 60 hertz. And then there's modified sine wave. I have one of those, that orange thing right there. You can get those at Walmart, fairly cheap, but it's not 60 hertz. Now the downside to that is you can't run sensitive electronics on it. So a TV, you're not supposed to run motors on them, so like your refrigerator, because over time they heat up and they'll burn out that motor. Now that said, I've ran a refrigerator on it for 4 years and it never burned up. But we have switched to pure sine wave, a little bit more expensive, and I guess it's worth it. A little bit of peace of mind that I'm not going to burn up my freezer and my well pump. So when I was researching the well, when we first bought this property, I wanted to find a well pump that would run off my generator. Now my generator is a little inverter generator. I showed you that inverter generator in that video I just mentioned. That'll be in the up next box. Again, not going to cover that today. It's not relevant to this video. So I needed something that I could plug into it. Now it's pretty small. It was 2,000 watts. The new one I got is 2,500 watts, but regardless, I needed something that I could run on it. Most well pumps I always knew of was 220. So this is 110 volt. My generator is 110 volt, but a well pump is 220. Now you could probably wire up your inverter somehow or another so you could have 2 breakers and make 220. I'm not an electrician. I'm not that good at that stuff, so I just didn't. Instead, I searched for a well pump that would run off this inverter. One of the things that a lot of people complain about with inverters is you lose electricity with it. If you turn this inverter on and you don't use any electric from it, you just unplug everything and the light's on, it uses 1 amp per hour. The bigger one here uses 2 amps. Now, if you're going to run something, you also have to consider a 10% increase on whatever you're running, because the inverter adds 10% to it. So if I'm running a 100 watt item, whatever it is, I got to add 10%. So now the item is 110 watts. So you do lose a little. So what a lot of off-gridders do, and people that live in vans, is they try to figure out how many DC things they can buy, like a DC refrigerator. Now the refrigerator, when we were nomads, I bought from Walmart. It was AC, plugged into the house, just like everybody else, and it was a little dorm-sized one. Lasted forever. But a lot of people criticized me and said that I should get a DC. Well, the one at the Walmart I bought, probably only $100, but a DC one cost like $1,000. Now they say the DC one lasts longer than the AC one, which I've not seen. My refrigerator lasted just fine because it bounced around so much in the truck. They said it was going to tear it up. But I don't even have that excuse here. Nothing bounces around in the house. So here's the thing. I was running off a modified sine wave, so the motor was supposed to be heating up. I'm bouncing it around everywhere. That was supposed to tear it up, yet it still runs. The refrigerator and our freezer runs about 100 watts. So I have to consider that when I'm inverting it. So now it's 110 watts. To me, that's not a big deal. I have 1200 watts of solar panels. Since the refrigerator only runs 15 minutes at a time, let's say a half hour total, in 1 hour, 1 clock hour, it runs a half hour. So as long as my solar panels are producing more electric than I need, I'm fine. So to me, the convenience of having the inverter far outweighs having DC equipment. It's more expensive. Some DC motors you have to do regular maintenance on, and I'm going to cover that in a little bit. So I have not spent a lot of time stressing over running a bunch of DC items to the house. One of the problems with DC is you have low volts, high amps. Well, if you run high amps through a wire, that wire can heat up. So you got to have bigger wires. The longer the distance and the further the amps have to travel, the bigger the wire you have to have. I wish there was an easy way to explain that, but if I'm running 1 amp through 1 foot of wire, I don't need a big, huge wire. But if running 100 amps through that 1 foot wire, I'm going to need a huge piece of wire. So since my batteries are way down here because the sun is down here and my house is way up there in the shade, there's about 150 feet between the two spots. So if I wanted to run DC, I'd have to have a cable this big around my arms. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it would have to be pretty huge to go up there. Whereas with the AC is just the opposite. Has high volts, low amps. So voltage you don't have to worry about. Now a lot of people are going to say, what about voltage drop? That is the least of my worries. Everybody's worried about voltage drop. Voltage drop just means that whatever you're running is going to run slower. It's not a huge issue in my mind, and you don't lose that many volts over this distance. So I have a 10 gauge wire, outdoor wire, that I ran up to the house. Then I have some extension cord here that I hooked up from the wire from the house and in here, because we had to move it, so I needed to add on. So I just bought this big, huge extension cord. I have less risk of fire, and it's going to cost less. So the equipment itself costs less. AC equipment costs less than DC equipment. And the wiring costs a lot less. I mean, think about the price of copper. It's just outrageously expensive. So I've dropped my cost just by having this thing, and all I got to do is worry about 10 watts. Because we're running that 100 watt device. Now, my well pump, I'm going to show you what my well pump looks like. This is not the actual well pump that's in my well. This is the first one that we owned. It still runs, and I'm keeping it as a backup. This one is a 30 gallon a minute, 3/4 horsepower well pump that is 110 volts. So it can run off that inverter, or it can run off my generator that I got right here. If you Google it, 3/4 horsepower motor, electric motor, takes 800 watts. So this takes 800 watts to run. Now you got to think, I'm running an electric cable from here all the way up to the well, which is about 100 feet away, and then down a hole another 100 feet. So there's 200 feet of wiring that I got to worry about. This is the first one we bought, and when we redid the well, I realized I didn't want anything this big. One thing is I made the hole diameter of the well smaller, so this was going to be a real struggle to get in there. See this little piece right here, this is a 4-inch pump, and I was going to put it in a 4-inch pipe, so it wasn't going to fit. So they say in YouTube videos that I could have disassembled this and still got it in there. It would have just been a tight fit. Well, I didn't want to risk it. Not only that, 30 gallons a minute was a lot of water. The recovery rate on my well is 5 gallons a minute. So when I redid the well, I pulled this one out, put it in storage, and I bought a 15 gallon a minute. It's still a 3/4 horsepower motor. That's what I thought was so interesting. Same size motor, but less water going through it because it was smaller. It's a 2-inch pump, not a 4-inch pump. 800 watts is what we're running. Now, remember I told you got to add in 10% for the inverter. It's actually like 8 to 10%, but just for argument's sake, in this video, we're going to call it 10%. So for 800 watts, I got to add on another 80 watts. Now, the well pump, as you know, only runs for a few minutes. Because what I use it for is to fill an IBC tank. And then IBC tank uses a DC RV pump. It's 6 amps. It's very small. It doesn't use a lot. As a matter of fact, I power it with a lawnmower battery, and I have a trickle charger on it. Now the trickle charger is hooked up to the inverter, but it just doesn't use any electricity. So when I start the well pump, I run it for maybe 15 minutes. So that's not a full hour. So when you're talking about 880 watts per hour, that means 880 watts per run hour. Well, I'm only running 15 minutes. So when we do the math, we divide that by 4, because that's a quarter of an hour. It's a 220 watts is all I'm running. Like I said, I got 1,200 watts of solar panels. So I have plenty of solar panels to run the well. Now, on rare occasions, I run it for a little bit longer, 30 minutes here, maybe sometimes, when I'm filling Carolyn's sinks for laundry, just whatever, but I have plenty of electric to do it. Now, if I wait until after 9:30 and I run it, I don't even have to worry about the batteries. The solar panels will run it all by itself. So I got 1,200 watts of solar panels. This is 800 watts. So I only have to produce 220 watts for that 15 minutes. It's not a struggle at all. Since I made the solar panels more efficient this year, this has been a real blast. Like I said, I don't know if I said it in this video, but I'm storing the generator now. I don't run it anymore. I used to run this and the other pump off the generator, but I haven't had to do that. But I was told by this guy that I have to run it off DC. He says that you're losing too much of electric and you're drawing too much electric from your inverter to run an AC motor. So you got to have a DC motor. Well, I looked into DC motors a long time ago, and then I did it again today. DC motors have a carbon brush on them. I think they're carbon. Don't quote me on that, but I think they're carbon. I'm going to call them carbon brush just for the heck of a video. So they have brushes on them, and those brushes wear out. Now, when I looked at these motors, 2019, there were tons of articles from 2014 that said you have to replace the brushes. So that means you have this thing down in the ground 100 feet. And every year you have to disassemble. I would have to disassemble my building that covers my well. I would have to pull this up. I'd have to buy new brushes and replace the brushes. Drop it back down there, get it all primed up again, get it running again. Of course, the well's going to be dirty because you just knocked this up against the well walls for up and down. So you're going to have to run the well several times to get it clean. You're going to have to shock the well because you just put your hands all over this. So you got to put bleach into the well. You pump all that water out. It's just not that friendly. So I decided to go with an AC and just go ahead and lose the 80 watts per hour or the 20 watts that I'm going to use it to run. It just didn't seem like that big of a deal. So, and I didn't want to have to replace brushes. The other downside to that pump was I think the one I needed was $700, but they range from $700 to $1,200 to get a DC pump, something that you're going to have to maintain all the time. Well, just like the refrigerator, my thinking is if I bought this one for 150 bucks, I could buy 10 of them for the cost of one DC pump, and I'm going to have to replace the brushes on it all the time. Same thing with the refrigerator. My thinking is $1,000 for a DC or $100 for an AC. I could replace the refrigerator 10 times. And just like I suspected, the AC refrigerator still works. But as you know, I've had this problem with either a group of people or one person who claims to be a retired code enforcer. They have called my code enforcement office. See, it could be one person or it could be a multitude of people. I keep banning these people and they just come up with new accounts and say that they're code enforcement. So it's either one person with multiple accounts or multiple people with one account. And they're all ganging up on me. Now they're saying that in order to live legally off-grid, which I don't know what legally they mean. There is no legally. You just have to follow whatever codes your area has. Code enforcement says my well is fine, my code enforcement. There is nothing in the code enforcement book that says I got to have a DC pump. So once again, it's just harassment. And I'm hearing in my comment section that anybody that is trying to live off grid is getting harassed, not by the government, by people, jealous people, their friends, their neighbors, family. I've heard people say that once they lived off grid, they turned them into social services. This is a clear example of keep it simple, stupid. I don't need a DC pump, something I got to pull out all the time and clean. I mean, I've seen YouTubers talking about these DC pumps, and anytime they talk about it, it's about SHTF, stuff hits the fan. They're putting them in case they need water during an electrical outage. Even if I wanted to run it on modified sine wave, that orange inverter, I've done that before. They say it's supposed to hurt it, but so if you'll click this up next box to take that video where I was talking about the generator and the electrical system. So if I can inspire you to keep it simple so you can live your dreams. Thanks for watching.